I had a couple of great questions right off the top, and I wanted to mention and talk about them. Last time we did the live stream, the theme was MythBusters, and there's a bunch more MythBusters questions in here. But I wanted to address one of the things I kept seeing in the comments of the MythBusters Q&As, which was people saying, oh, you know, Adam, you're wrong that television couldn't support a show like that. Oh, it's a perfect YouTube show. It could totally live on YouTube, which is absolutely, you're not incorrect about that. But what you aren't taking into account is that there is no version of YouTube that could afford to make MythBusters. When we finish the show, I don't think I'm very far off with this number. I believe our per episode budget for MythBusters was about $750,000 expended for each episode. I'm not positive if that included all the talent fees, but that was employee salaries, facilities management, expendables, permits, everything. And there, aside from Mr. Beast and some of the amazing, beautiful stuff that Mark Rober does, nobody is spending close to $1 million for a single episode on YouTube of anything. And that's from the business model that has totally changed since we made MythBusters. You know, when we were making that show, there was still network television where advertising on television was still the best way to get the most saturation out of your market. And thus the premium on advertising was high, and that meant that the networks were willing to spend on their shows. And that leads directly into this other question. As a monkey in a piñata has asked, were you ever scared of being stuck in an explosion episode inflation spiral? This is a great phrase. It seems like each explosion was larger by orders of magnitudes. Was there a push to keep going bigger on an, was the push to keep going bigger an internal decision, or was there pressure from the network? It was both. And for the most part, we attempted the best we could to ignore the network with that kind of stuff. And this is the point where, you know, I think people would be thinking, yeah, networks are stupid, the network execs give terrible notes, and they often give terrible notes, but they are not stupid. And I wanted to, like, in the discussing of the explosion episode inflation spiral, talk a little bit about late-stage capitalism in modern television. The thing you need to understand is that, like, television at the ground level is an art form. What me and Carrie, Tori, Grant, and Jamie did was we were making art. We really felt committed to the process of what we were doing. We were well paid for it, to be sure, but the only satisfaction we got out of that job was exploring our own creativity in executing that job. And I think that really cascaded down through our whole team. And our executive producers at Beyond Productions, our executive producer, Dan Tapster, also an artist devoted to the art of making that show. But above us is a network executive who is being talked to by the bosses at the network saying, your channel has to bring in X amount, you got to bring in more, you got to cut your costs. So what I can tell you right now is that any sitting television executive is getting the most tremendous pressure from above them to cut their costs, slash them constantly. Which means that companies don't like to do mass firings. They like to do quiet firings. They like to get rid of just like a few percent of their workforce every quarter, which means that a lot of network executives have to choose who to fire every quarter because their budget is being lowered constantly, which means whoever made the most recent mistake is often the person who's going to get fired, which means that these organizations populated by really smart people who want to do good work, these folks are being forced into making these horrifying decisions for commerce, because that's the reason the network exists. It exists to make money for the shareholders under, you know, Keynesian late-stage economics. They're not stupid at the network, but they have a different commitment. And there's this thing I love to say, which is that like the network will ride you. I've pitched so many shows to so many networks. The network will ride you really hard on the pitch and the design of the pitch and the flavor and the attitude. And the moment the show awards, they seem to care about nothing except what happens in the last 5 minutes. And this is where I'm addressing the explosion episode inflation spiral. At one point, the network was asking us for every episode, hey, what about this episode is the uniquest thing that ever uniqued in the world, so that we can advertise it. And it's like, that's the executive wanting to tell their bosses, this is the most one, and we went out to advertise, and we said it's the biggest thing, it's the best thing, instead of, it's the show you love, keep watching it. It's like always trying to win new people, always trying to eat more people. It's this maw that just wants to chew. Whereas and look, I'm not decrying a marriage between commerce and art, because it is a marriage and there's no divorce ever happening. Commerce and art have always coexisted. Leonardo had patrons and required them to do what he did. Every artist has to deal with commerce and has to be able to make a living, and the network is no different. So I really don't begrudge network executives the choices they have to make, but it is useful as an artist to think about the reasons they are required to make those choices and the pressures upon them. One of the people I love working with the most, my right hand here at Tested, Kristen Lomosny, turned down her boss's job a lot over her professional career. And that is someone who did not want, in my opinion, and I haven't double checked this exact fact with her, she'll tell me right after the live stream, but this was someone who did not want to have to make decisions based on the pressures from above, wanted to execute on the ground level where she had the most effect. And I really understand that. So there was pressure from the network to do things bigger. And the fact is, actually, whenever we brought them something huge, like the third iteration of Rocket Car, Discovery was a fantastic partner. They totally saw the light in that episode could gain more viewers, and ponied up, I think, an extra $100,000 for that episode. There is no disconnecting of commerce and art. And so while it's common in our cultural parlance to talk about network executives as being idiots, that's not the case. In fact, almost every network executive sitting in a position of power over productions was a production person themselves, and they were extremely good at it, which is how they matriculated up. This is the other thing that happens is anytime you are really good at making proper, oh, right, sorry. I know I'm going on a little bit long about this, but I wanted to cover this. You can never game your culture. I don't think. You can sort of extend your lifespan a little bit, but your work either intersects with culture or it doesn't. And a network exec is trying to do this sort of forcing the show to engage with the culture in this way that makes them a ton of money. But it's a formula that you're kind of throwing darts at a wall. As an artist on the ground, my goal in producing MythBusters and producing it with our whole team was trying to remain ignorant of those pressures to make the thing we were making as pure to itself as it could be. And that is really the only thing that the artist can do within that framework. Commit to making the thing as good as it can be while trying to drown out the noise of commerce. Okay, I've said my little rant. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I wanted to briefly mention that you could become a Tested member. I know, everybody is competing for you to become a member of their thing. What I want to express to you is that the Tested membership has become such an important part of the Tested family. We get tremendous feedback from the Tested members, and they expand the stories that we can tell and the things that we have access to, and you can become a part of it right now by clicking on the link below. See you in the chat.